Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Motivating Your Team Members, hosted by HRDQ. I'm Dennis Barr and we'll be moderating today's session. If you look in your dashboard, you'll see an area where it says that you can download your handouts. It's the PowerPoint slides with some area to take notes, so please do that if you'd like. We want your questions and comments during the webinar, so please feel free to type them into the chat box on your dashboard. We'll answer as many of your questions as we can during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And the questions that we cannot get to will be answered after the webinar and shared with everybody in an email next week. And now, today's presenter is Geoff Nichols. He's HRDQ Senior Instructor and the Principal of Nikon Associates. He has a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in safety engineering and decades of managing people and processes. Geoff has a wide and deep background to draw from. Business training has been Geoff's passion for nearly all his career. He's trained more than 30,000 people in a wide range of management and leadership topics, and he's written over 600 customized training programs for hundreds of clients, ranging from large and small businesses to federal and state government agencies to healthcare and nonprofit organizations. So thank you all for joining us today, and without further ado, take it away, Geoff.
Thank you, Dennis. This is a real pleasure. This is probably one of the top two topics that I work on in my consultancy. One of them is motivation. It's perhaps the most talked about topic in my career, and the other is communication. What's interesting is that they're related, and we're not going to get away from one. Whoop, here. Okay. We're not going to get away from one without running into the other. So I'm going to be talking about both, but with a focus on motivation itself. We're going to talk about what the experts say about motivation, and also we want to talk about practical motivation. Let's face it, a lot of it is theoretical, a lot of it is theoretical psychology, and psychology is a hard thing to prove. So we're going to be going off of what has been shown to be effective by a number of studies, if you will. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. And I've got a question for you, and that question is, how many of you have kept a note or written performance review from one of your supervisors long after you worked for them? Now, when I say a note, I mean a handwritten note. And take a moment, and if you would, select yes or no in the poll. It will give you a few moments here to respond to it.
And we're still collecting responses, Geoff, so we'll wait another 15 seconds or so.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dennis.
Okay, it looks like most of the answers are in. Do we want to post the responses?
Please do. Wow. I have to tell you, in my training, I don't think I've ever seen the yes box be 74%. It's been more like 65 or so. But it does make a point, doesn't it, that we keep things for a reason. We're going to talk about what the reasons are, because that's what goes to the heart of motivation. All right, so I've got another question for you. You said yes, but the real question now is why? Let's see here. Dennis, do you need to go out of poll mode so I can advance these slides? There we go.
Okay.
For those who responded yes, why? Was it A, it makes you feel good to read them once in a while? You actually pull them out and kind of peruse them? Or B, you wanted to keep good documentation, always a good idea in this day and age. Or C, you stuck it in a file, forgot about it until one day you rediscovered it and it's still there. Or D, please state briefly in the questions box your particular reason why you kept it, and we'll give you the time to do that now.
Okay, we're getting some really fast responses. Looks like people have thought about this prior to the webinar, Geoff.
Wow, cool.
Here's one of the responses with from the other category is when I need encouragement, I look at my file of Attagirl notes.
Perfect. That's exactly what they're for. And that goes to the heart of the matter. Let's see what other kinds of things we get.
Okay, I think we're about ready. We want to post the results.
Yes, please. Excellent. Look at that. A is 32%, B 49%, good documentation. C is 10%, and D 9%. Interesting. Any others that you can scan quickly, Dennis, and tell us about under the D other category?
Sure can. Yeah, we have one that the person looks at it for a future for reviewing to see what I need to improve on or continue doing. And that's by Deborah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good for you, Deborah, and good for you for all of you. And thank you for your participation. What I've said there on the one who said that they like to look back and see, get their Attagirls there, you know, that's one of the hearts of motivation, because someone else's opinion, and in particular the supervisor's opinion, is critical. And so we need to be able to make sure that we, if we are supervisors or if we're just co-team workers, that we're telling people what we think and we're doing it in writing. We're going to talk about how we do that. And a lot of you are saying, holy Toledo, wait a minute, Geoff, I got 25 people reporting to me. I can't write notes all the time. And what I'm going to do is suggest to you, you don't have to. Every now and again will make a big difference. So let's go ahead and continue on here and look at our agenda. Our agenda for today is, well, you can read it as well as I can read it to you. So let me shut up for just a moment and let you scan. Okay, so we're going to start first with the principles of motivation, and the experts that I've selected for us to take a look at, they have a way of telling us that what we need to do is to focus on what other people want. And there's a tendency for us to say, how can I motivate this person? Well, let's start first by defining what motivation means. These are three that I just selected at random, and the first one is from a dictionary, the Merriam-Webster dictionary, a reason to act. And if you look at the word motivation, that's kind of obvious. Motive is a reason. Ation with a C inserted is action. So that's, you know, I'm sure there's some type of Latin derivative there. The second one is a skill that individuals already have and can learn to improve. I have to tell you that this is something that kind of struck me. I had heard about it before and heard people discuss it before, but Dennis actually a few days ago sent me an article by a consultant named Susan Fowler, and she opined that people don't need to be motivated. They are already motivated for the job, but the question is, can they learn to be motivated more? And she says yes, that motivation is a skill. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know, that's really true. And it's also really true that it's difficult. And in fact, this whole thing about how do I motivate Geoff or Dennis or anyone else is really asking the wrong question. The right question is, what motivates Dennis? What motivates Geoff? And how does that connect to their jobs and this organization? So most of us, though, think about this last quote, the condition of being eager to act or work, meaning we want them to work at a higher rate. We want our employees, our coworkers, to work with better quality. We want them to provide greater quantity of work, and then also greater quality. So that's probably the more popular motivation of motivation, and excuse me, definition of motivation. And that's the one that we're going to focus on for most of the rest of our discussion today. So the first expert, and everybody has seen this at one time in your life, I think they start teaching Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, I think on the day after you're born. It's that, it just seems like it's everywhere all the time. But it's kind of funny, if I ask people in training sessions when I'm on site, if I say, okay, Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, how many have heard of it? Well, 90% of the hands will go up, and I'll say, okay, then just kind of tell me what they are. What's the beginning one? Let's see, they'll say psychological, security, safety, and I'll say, well, physiological comes before that. All right, so what's after we go physiological, then security or safety, then what? And I start getting blank stares. So it's one thing to have heard about it, it's another thing altogether to know about it, and it's yet another thing to actually use it. So what we're going to do is look very quickly here. Physiological is pretty obvious. You got to eat, you got to breathe, you got to drink water, you got to sleep. There's a lot of things we got to do to keep body and soul together. And once those needs have been met, Maslow says, once you've met a need, you're ready to go on to the next level. So having taken care of physiological needs, we need safety, we need security, we need shelter. And once we have those needs met, then we begin to look at belonging. And the same thing there. Belonging to what? Belonging to just about anything, any kind of grouping that you have, whether it's race, religion, color, gender, or football team that you like most. We like to belong, and that is crucial to our success as a species. But we also like to stand out, and that's what self-esteem is about. We're going to see that these in themselves, these what Maslow called upper level needs, belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization, they're the things that actually are the greatest motivators and the greatest tools that we can offer to our employees. It's the old leading a horse to water. We can't make them drink, but we can make sure there's plenty of good, fresh water for them there in the attempt to help them engage and connect and be better motivated. Now, self-actualization, I'm often asked, what the heck does that mean? That's been kind of a mystery for many people. It's been interpreted many ways, and I'll give you my interpretation, and that is that I can't think of a better phrase, and it is an old Army marketing phrase, but it's being all you can be, physically, mentally, and emotionally. You reach a point in life where things are going well and you're content because you have been able to, you're in a job you like and you're able to do things you like well, you're in relationships you like, and they're very supportive for you. You've got goals for the future and things look pretty good. That's being more self-actualized. And by the way, you start thinking about things that go beyond you. Start thinking about volunteer work, donations that you can make. So self-actualization is something that's a goal that a lot of people don't make necessarily, or if they do make it, it's for a brief time. And that is a key here to Maslow's hierarchy is once you've achieved a level of motivation, it doesn't mean you're going to keep it. In fact, very quickly, I think about the poor people who suffered through wildfires and mudslides in California. I mean, they're in a very nice area there in Montecito. I've seen it. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's expensive. And for many of them, it's gone. So if they were at self-actualization, there for a while, for some of them, the question was, will I survive? So their need goes right down to physiological because everything else doesn't matter if you don't have that need met. So we go up and down Maslow's hierarchy of human needs every day, every week, every month. And what we try to do is to go on to the next need when we can. And our job as supervisors is to help people see how they can go to that next level. Now, another expert that we wanted to consult, and this is a man who was a a contemporary of Abraham Maslow. This goes back to the late 1940s and the throughout the 50s and 60s. This motivators and dissatisfiers, it comes from Frederick Herzberg. It's a little bit different slant on a similar kind of content to Maslow, but I don't think that Herzberg in any way attempted to use Maslow's information. What he said is that basically there's two kinds of factors that people have with regard to motivation. The first one is motivators, which are intrinsic to the job. It's the challenge of the job, the kind of the stuff that engages you. If you're an accountant, and my wife is a CPA, and there's nothing she likes better to get into a thorny accounting problem, which for me would be slow agony and certainly death within a very short time. I'm not big on tedious kinds of things, but she likes to do puzzles and that sort of thing. It's the activity itself that causes people to engage at a higher level. Now, Herzberg also said that there are things called dissatisfiers, and what they are is they relate mostly to extrinsic or external factors to the job itself. So policies, company policies, supervision, and we mean this in a generic term, not necessarily you if you are a supervisor, but management. You know how people say, well, the man, or senior management, or mahogany row, whatever phrase that they use, it's those people way over there or up there. That's what we mean by supervision. Salary, working conditions, and what Herzberg said is that these factors don't have as much power to motivate as they have the power to dissatisfy. Now think about that for a second. If somebody is getting paid well, they're happy for a while. But I've noticed, and I've had a lot of feedback from people in my seminars who've nodded this at the same time as I say this, is that you get a raise and that feels good for a while. It might be days, it might be weeks, it might even go into a month or two, but sooner or later the question rears in your head, when's the next one? And how much can it be? And how can I make more? So money is not a continuing motivator, and for the most part, most people feel like they should be paid more. So it has the power to dissatisfy more than it has the power to satisfy or motivate. And it's an interesting take on things that the question is begged, does money motivate? And the answer is yes, no, and maybe. And I'm going to give you the answers to that, or give you the explanations here in just a little bit. So we're going to use these experts. There's also something here in your notes you might want to jot down. There's an author named Daniel Pink, and he's written a book, and I'm going to butcher this title. I don't remember it right away, but it's something like Motivation, What Science Knows and What Business Does. And it very clearly, he says, there's a big disconnect between what we know really does motivate, which is intrinsic factors. We know this, and yet there's still this big focus on extrinsic factors. Now, do we have to make sure we get the extrinsic factors right, or at least at a level that's satisfactory? Of course, sure. But do we expect to get more and better performance or behavior out of people as a result of these things, working conditions, salary, and policies? Probably not. So, by the way, Daniel Pink also he's got a couple of books out, but he's also got a great TED Talk. So you might want to jot that down. He's quite a talented speaker. He's funny, and he makes a good point. Most of what he's talking about is Herzberg's theory. This is my opinion, but updated. And he's got a lot of data to support what he says. So I highly recommend that. Okay. So our challenge, if we're going to kind of lead the horse to water, we got a motivated horse. We just don't know how thirsty it is. But what we want to do is focus on what Maslow called higher order needs, and that is, of course, belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. And that means that when we're talking with our team members, that we need to be able to answer these questions. Now, not all of them, and not all of the time, but we need to have answers. And the first one is probably the most important of all four of them. What we know in adult learning theory is that adults need to know more than just what to do, when to do it, how to do it, where to do it. What they need to know is why. Now, for some people, well, it's none of their business. It's need to know. I told you to do it, just do it. That's an authoritative and perhaps even authoritarian approach that is demotivating rather than motivating. And let's face it, there's not that much in corporate America that's really need to know. So why is this important? It'll help us get a jump on our, my wife's name is Mickey, so if I were to say to her, we need to get this report out done right away so that I can send it off to HRDQ, first thing in her mind is going to be why? Because she's trying to line up the priority that my project is in her mind. So why not say it up front? The reason we're doing this is to get out ahead of the jam that we know is coming in the next month or so, when we'll have a lot of work coming our way and HRDQ is going to need this information then. Why don't we get it done now so that we can give ourselves a break and not be quite as stressed? Well, for my wife, less stress is a good thing, and I know this. So how does this help people? These are questions that go to the route, to the heart of the matter in terms of what is the vision of our organization or our team? What is our aspiration? Now let me give you an example. In this project here, what we can do is not just how does this help people, this is information that HRDQ absolutely needs to know to operate with me as a consultant. So if that's the case, then it helps us. But sometimes, and not all cases, but in some times, the people we're helping are people we've never known, we've never seen. It reminds me of a time when I was doing some training with supervisors with an agency of the Department of Defense. A young woman who was an accountant was in the audience, and the motto of this particular agency is, "We support the warfighter." Well, if she's in accounting, how does she support the warfighter? Well, she found out. She told us the story about how she was working late one night. It was about 7 o'clock her time, and she got this call from, it was hard to make out because it was scratchy and it sounded like there was a lot of wind, and it was some private, a PFC in Afghanistan, calling for help with his computer. This particular organization was computer-based and provided computer services. Couldn't get his computer to work. Needed it right now because the sergeant said this or that or the other thing. And she said, I'm not a computer person, but I'll get you to the right person. So she stayed with him. She didn't just send him off and hope he got what he needed. She made sure that she went through, and she said it took 3 or 4 tries. Turns out all he needed was an administrator with a password, and he bollocksed up the password. So as we, a lot of us have over time. So what she said is the big light bulb came on over my head. I support the warfighter regardless of what he or she needs. Now that may not be quite as dramatic in your business, but my guess is that there are people that you support and that need to be supported better. Other questions, what are our goals? How do I fit in? These are the kinds of things that adults need to know and that they find more influencing or more compelling. Okay, so does money motivate? And I said yes, no, and maybe. It depends on the kind of job. Is it a hard job? Does it require a lot of expertise to get into? Or does it require a higher level of skill than most other jobs? Can we measure these things? Well, yeah, there are compensation companies out there who do this all the time. They can tell us that the difficulty, expertise required, and impact of the job are what go into the weight of it. And the heavier, if you will, the job weighs, the more it gets paid. One thing that I can tell you is that the kind of job does really come into the play because of its, well, It depends. Every job's got tedious stuff. And let me give you one job that's got very tedious stuff, and that is inside sales. Inside sales, selling by telephone, is one of the hardest jobs, frankly, I've ever done, that I did in my consultancy when I was working with companies who needed training on sales for their inside salespeople. And when you think about it, this is a job that gets nothing but rejection almost 90% of the time. And I would say when I did it, I didn't get many hang-ups or people being mad. They just said, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. Okay, well, we move on. But when you hear I'm not interested in one form or another, 10 times, 15 times, 20 times an hour, and you call 4 hours a day, that's a lot of rejection. Now, I grant you, it's a big cheer when people actually say, yeah, I'd like to hear more. It's kind of like, you do? So when you do that, it's nice, it's very motivating, but most of the time, it's tough. Now, it also depends on the motivators of the person, and that's what we're going to look at next. What motivates the individual? Now, this is one of HRDQ's most recent products that it had developed and actually published back in January 2016. And it's a 4-quadrant personality style assessment. Now, I've used many of these in my career. I kind of settled on a couple at one time, and I've got to tell you, they're all good. They all do a good job. They just have different facets of how they look at the issue of personality. Now, when you see here, if you look with me at the top of the page under where it says personality style at work, and by the way, we're going to shorten that to the acronym PSAW. It says personality style is defined by the intersections of task versus relationship preference, which is, if you look at on the wheel, task focus is over on the left side of the horizontal line, and relationship focus is on the right side of the horizontal line. So these are two polar opposites to some degree. And then we look at internal and external focus. Internal focus tends to be people who think a lot. They, if something comes up, they want to think about it, and they'll say, give me a little time to think about that. Whereas somebody who's more externally focused will think generally for shorter times. They tend to be more action-oriented. They're doers. Whereas people who are below the horizontal line in the internal focus tend to be thinkers. That doesn't mean that they don't do stuff. It just, they need to think things through to probably a greater level than the people with more external focus. All right, now this is the basis of it. It's based on a book that was written by a man named William Moulton Marston, who wrote a book called On the Emotions of Normal People. Now, we need to remember that, because this is not a diagnostic tool. It won't tell you if you or any of your coworkers are a little bit crazy or a lot crazy. It has nothing to do with that. It talks about personality, which is the consistent pattern of our thoughts, feelings, and actions. Okay, now this doesn't stop here. We're going to go on here because we want to look at how PSAW is different and provides what I think is information that is more weighty in many ways and gets down to the bottom line result, and that is, how easy can you use it? It's great to know all this stuff, but how do I use this? Okay. If you look, we have a new wheel here on the outside rim, and that has to do with the 3 drivers each of the quadrants have. So if you look in the upper left-hand corner or upper left-hand quadrant labeled direct, we can see that that is a task-focused in the white wheel. It's task-focused and it's externally focused. And the 3 main drivers, which we can also use the word motivators, are control, achievement, and challenge. Now, when you look at achievement and you look at challenge, it's true to say that these folks have a higher need, a greater preference for competition. They enjoy competition and they love winning. And so when we ask, does money motivate? Well, it does, to the extent that someone may perceive it as a competition to demonstrate that they can make the most sales that they can get the most projects done, whatever it might be, to the extent that they feel that they are in competition, then achievement and challenge are great things to appeal to if we want to ask them to move at a higher level, to be very motivated. As we go around, we won't look at all of these, but as we go around and look at this, you can see spirited in the upper right-hand corner, more external and relationship focused, to considerate, more relationship and internally focused, and finally to systematic. And I'll tell you right now, systematic is the best one, mainly because it's mine.
Hey, Geoff, that's very funny knowing you're systematic. And I just want to ask or make a statement too, is somebody had said if you want an energized, motivated team, begin by examining your own motivations, or I would say what you just said based on these style drivers, also called motivators. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, thank you, Dennis. I appreciate that. What's really being said there, I think, is that we motivate on an individual basis. We can impact morale with contests and bonuses that everybody gets the same amount. That impacts morale, but that may not be great motivators. It's like, who said it? Tip O'Neill, the great politician in Massachusetts, said, all politics is local. I would tell you that all motivation is personal. So it also goes to what President Dwight Eisenhower said back in the early 50s, and I'm paraphrasing him here. Yes, I was alive at that time, but I simply read this quote. He said, motivation is the art of getting people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. Now, that, I think, is one of the most profound statements I've heard, because what it requires is that we know what they want. So this gives us an idea here. When Dennis asked me what, the significance of it, if you know that I'm systematic, you know that my top 3 motivators are organization, objectivity, and tradition. Now, I'm not going to define those all right now. It's in the book, but I think that it's pretty self-explanatory. I need structure, and if I don't have enough structure, I'll create it. In fact, I prefer my own. It's that way for systematics. I need facts and data more than I need opinions, and in fact, I get a little cross if people tell me about things, but they're not using facts. And yes, I like tradition. Why change it if it's not broke? Well, as you can imagine, because of my tremendous computer capacity, which, by the way, is really 0. I'm still not convinced that computers are the way to go, but I have no other choice. Okay, so that's how the personality style at work works. Think of drivers as personal motivators. Okay, if we look at direct, control, achievement, challenge. If we looked at spirited, remember, spirited is the one that's over in the upper right-hand side, and it's both relationship-oriented and externally focused. So spirited people like initiation. They're great idea people. You can get them to, if you say, Betty, what do you think we could do to do this, that, and the other? Because here's what I really want to do. Betty's going to come up with 25 ideas in about 2 minutes flat if she's a true high-level spirited person. Conceptualization, let's flesh this out a little bit. And most important for many of them, collaboration. It's talking with people, working with people, feeling like we have a common cause. If we look at considerate and systematic, you can see that those are both of them are below the horizontal line, so they tend to be more internally focused. They tend to be more thinkers. Considerate tends to be more relationship oriented, whereas systematic more task, data, objectivity oriented. So these are actually terms that we can use. I could say, Dennis, I'd like to tell you, I'm looking for a way to have greater harmony on the team. Sometimes I feel like we're kind of disconnected. What kinds of ideas do you have? Well, it's kind of like, I just hit him on the head with a hammer to get his attention when he heard that word harmony, because that rings his bell. So, recommend not hitting people in the head, but using words to do it anyway. Okay, so, and by the way, Dennis is a considerate. But what he has done is adapted also. He's adapted what we call his, come on now. There we go. 2 more dimensions. One is an influencing driver, and an influencing driver is one that is outside of your primary style. Now, for example, if you look at the wheel here in this, this slide, let's take systematic because I know it so well. And I have an influencing driver that is the control driver from the direct style. So I have 4, if you will, drivers, but that influencing driver is a secondary driver. It's something that influences my primary drivers, but it does not supplant them. It doesn't take over for them. But what it does do, if you look at organization and control, I'm somebody who, doesn't just expect organization and a structure and a systematic process. I rather insist on it. So that's part of my personality. Dennis is a considerate who is comfortable talking with just about anybody about anything. He really sets things at ease. Dennis, what is your influencing driver?
It is spirited, and it's collaboration.
Okay, and that makes great sense. Dennis and I are on a couple of teams now together at HRDQ, and it's really a delight to work with him.
Likewise.
So, influencing driver is one of the things that's very different about PSAW than any other personality style inventory that I know of. And then the last 2 things, assertiveness and expressiveness, those are the main tools. And when it comes right down to it, they are what count when using PSAW. So if you, for example, knowing Dennis, knowing that I have a tendency to be assertive and less expressive, I tend to say things in a monotone fashion in short sentences, which can be off-putting for some people, but is quite normal for me. What I know that if I'm working with Dennis or any other considerate or spirited, I need to be more expressive and less assertive. And we have specific examples in the PSAW document. Whereas if I'm dealing with a direct personality, I'm going to be less expressive, meaning for me, I'll use less words and I'll get right to the point. So I'll be less expressive and more assertive, and I'll come out and say, here's what I think we ought to do. Now he or she may say, I don't agree. And that's fine. I've had a chance to express myself in their terms, not mine. And that's the key that PSAW brings to us, is the ability to have the specifics of what we need to do to be more influential with people. Dennis?
So Geoff, right there is just to kind of take that statement that I mentioned, and after listening to that section, is I think I might change that. If you want an energized, motivated team, begin by examining your own motivations or motivators, but also begin to understand others. And that's a great way of, and PSAW seems to be a great tool for becoming a better influencer and a better, let's say, team leader and a better, let's say, team member.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good observation. Thank you.
And anybody who is interested in learning more about the personality style at work assessment, on your dashboard, you can click to raise your hand and we'll get information to you about that. And also offering a free complimentary assessment so that you can actually take it.
Oh, wonderful. Great.
I consider it, Geoff. How do you like that deal?
Considerate. That was a very considerate way to put all that. I appreciate it. Now, you also made a point that I want to hammer home because it's so important. These dimensions, the PSAW itself, is a tool that allows you to be able to know what people want. Now, is it exact? No, there's no inventory that's 100%. At best, what it does is give us a good educated guess. And PISA allows us to look at people and say, are they more externally focused? That is, do they like to talk? Do they like to get involved? Do they, do they tend to focus more on people, or are they more internally focused? Now, some of this we can't know unless we have worked around people for some period of time, and it's not a long time, maybe just a few days, maybe a week or so. We can begin to get signals, but the longer that we have worked with them, then the better able we're going to be able to answer the questions: are they more externally focused or more internally focused? Once we answer that question, we are on one half of the wheel. So let's assume that it's an external focus. And then we say, well, do they tend to be more task-oriented or more relationship-oriented? Well, boom, Jenny doesn't know any strangers. She is the happiest person I know, and if she's not happy, she fakes it well. So I'm going to go with spirited on that. So what we can do is narrow things down by hemisphere and by quadrant and have a pretty good guided guess as to who we're dealing with. And this goes right to the notion of getting people to do what we want them to do because they want to do it. We're talking to them in their terms. We're talking to them in their motivators. And we're also talking to them in the style that they prefer, both in terms of assertiveness and expressiveness. Those are the tools. Those are the skill sets that we really focus on. So PISA has got a ton of psychology supporting it. It is validated in all ways and is been statistically examined by a number of agencies. So it's very I think reliable is what I'm saying, and it speaks to the truth, at least as we know it now, of what psychology is. It's not pop psychology; it's real psychology. But we haven't got time for that in the workplace. What we really need to know is, who am I dealing with, and how can I best meet their needs? Okay, so individual motivation, this is what I focused on before. The question is, how can I be a coach to team members? The first thing we can do is begin to look and see, do they tend to be, which personality style do they have? And which of the drivers do I think is probably most motivational for them? Use the 1-minute manager approach. Oh, I'm sorry, I want to come back to coaching. What we do when we coach is to talk with people about their wants and needs. So I might say something like, Sarah, what do you want to do in 2 years or 5 years from now? Where do you see yourself going, and how can I help you get there? So that might put her on the spot, and we have a lady named Sarah who's listening, and I don't expect you to respond, Sarah, but your name popped into my mind. So what I'm going to do is to use my knowledge of who they are and what motivates them most to provide coaching and guidance in their career, and perhaps other things that I need to say to a Sarah or a Jane or someone else. Where you want to go, you're on the right path, but you're going to need more education. And if you haven't thought about it already, think in terms of going back to school, because we've got a educational assistance program, and you don't have to go more than a couple times a night and get that master's in business or get that master's in psychology. It all depends on what the person wants to do. But if I know what I know now because of PISA, I'm in a position to be a better coach. Then I use the 1-minute manager approach. This is from a small book written by a man named Ken Blanchard, who is one of the great gurus of management training, of helping people perform at higher levels. And I think it's one of the neatest books he's written because it's so simple. What he basically says is that I'm going to try to make sure that I both offer complimentary information and feedback to people in no more than 1 minute, and if I need to, I'll give them that corrective information too, of course, in private, and take no more than 1 minute. So it's a highlights approach. That way people get more feedback, and we don't have to worry so much about, I've got 25 people reporting to me. How can I possibly have meaningful conversations? Well, you don't need to. If you've had an opening conversation that's kind of a coaching one, and you find out that somebody wants to be a chief executive of some sort of an organization, then an MBA is the thing to be talking to them about. But then later you can say, well, how's the, take 1 minute to say, how's that MBA program going? What are you working on now? Okay, cool. Management accounting. Ugh, that's kind of tough. I never was an accountant. Well, how are you doing? That's the kind of thing that really works to motivate people. Just as the 1 minute manager, darn it, there we go. That's 1 minute manager. Now let's look at also brief handwritten notes. We've already proven the power of brief handwritten notes. I can tell you that what I did when I was working for the largest one-day public seminar company in the country and the world at that time, we had about 150 trainers out. They reported to me, and I made sure that although we had 40 or 50 people out every week doing one-day seminars somewhere in the world, that when I got their summaries, their evaluations, I didn't read all of them because there were hundreds, but I made sure I took out 2 or 3, especially the ones where they were writing. I'd write things like, Dennis, great job, you represent us well, I appreciate it. And then when I left that company, I'd written so many of those notes, I'd forgotten about them over the years, but I had a lot of trainers come up to me in my going away party, and guys, people were really happy. I'm not sure why that was, but in any case, I had them come up to me and say, do you remember when you wrote this? Boy, it got me through a lot of tough times. Truth is, I didn't remember, but it really meant a lot to them. And the same is true of your coworkers and your team members. And there's a book called 1001 Ways to Reward Employees, written by a man named Bob Nelson. Now, it's an older book, but that doesn't mean bad or insufficient. You can probably, I don't know, Dennis, does HRDQ actually sell this book? I don't even know.
Yeah, I do not think we sell it, but I'm sure it's available on Amazon.com.
Yeah. So if you're unlimited, Kindle Unlimited, then you can get this in a big darn hurry. And it's a book worth reading. It'll give you a lot of ideas, but most of them tend to be group motivational oriented, what I refer to as morale oriented. And by the way, he also has another book called 1001 Ways to Inspire Employees. Okay, I got it there. Now there's something called emotional nutrition that was coined by a man named John Deeseth, who's been a friend of mine for over 20 years. He's a consultant also. He has worked with many manufacturing firms, and he's also done a lot. In fact, let me see here, I want to make sure I get this right. He wrote a book called, bear with me, Building Business-to-Business Relationships Over the Phone. He is an expert in this. He wrote a book which is being published, or I think is already out now, from HRDQ. The principles in there are guided towards inside salespeople, but the application is for all employees. All of us who work need to look at this, and all of us who supervise can get a lot out of it. What he says is basically every job has tedious aspects, and it creates emotional labor. That can be stress, it can be boredom, it can be just about any emotion you can name. That kind of gets us down from time to time, and what we need is emotional nutrition. Now, what do we mean by emotional nutrition? First of all, we can't get rid of emotional labor. It's built into the job. We can't say to inside salespeople, that's okay, you don't need to call 60 people today like your normal standard. Just forget about it and have fun. No, it doesn't work that way. They've still got to make the calls. They've still got to endure the tedium. They've still got to endure the occasional rude person that really can ruin your day, quite honestly. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's tough. What we do say, though, is, Jim, you've been doing great, and I really appreciate it. And I was thinking, would it be beneficial to you to sit with Betty over there? Betty's one of our top salespeople, and she's got a unique way of really attacking her prospects and leads. If you sat with her for a half hour or an hour, would that help you? In fact, I will. excuse you from the 20 calls that we normally would expect during that hour if you would sit with her. Well, most people are going to say, yeah, I'd love to do that. Now that's what John calls emotional nutrition, because we're going to the heart of the matter. I'm burned out. I can't make any more calls today. I need something different. So shadowing high performers, brainstorming sessions, and one other thing I might say is simply to avoid demotivating. That's one thing that supervisors do a lot of, and I was famous for it. I didn't know it at the time, but I heard about it later. My assumption was that most people would tell me when they've already got enough work and they can't really do more without really going into a tailspin. I thought they'd tell me this. I was very wrong. The people that I gave more to, it turned out, were the people who felt the most emotional labor, because I was so inconsiderate that I didn't ask them how they were doing before I gave that job. Can they really take this job on, this project? Had I done that, nobody wants to say, no, boss, I can't take any more, but I could have done it another way. I could have said, Jane, on a 10-point scale with 10 being max possible stress, where are you? And if she said, well, 8 or 9, or she says 7 or 8, then I'm going to think, whoa, we're getting close here, and maybe I need to back off. So one of the things we need to avoid is something that the pros call positive performance punishment. If somebody does a good job, what do? We give them more because they've shown they can do it. They become our go-to people. We don't even ask some of the other people who are maybe lesser performers. And so the high performers become unnecessarily and unfairly burdened, and that's demotivating. Or if we're going to do that, let's make sure that we are able to offer some type of rewards that recognize the extra effort they make. Available to everybody, but only if they perform at high levels that these go-to people do. Okay, my final thoughts. I'm going to go back to what we talked about before. We got to find a way to help people do what we want them to do because they want to do it. I have to tell you that's hard for me. As a systematic, and I'm not using that as an excuse, but it sure explained a lot to me when people said you're not very friendly, you never smile. Well, I do smile, but some people have trouble seeing it. And I see myself as a happy guy, but some people have trouble seeing it. A lot because of my personality style. And the reason is that I did not go to people, I did not try to give people more emotional nutrition and find more ways to motivate. Well, it's because I was uncomfortable with people. And in fact, I didn't want to deal with people, but I had to. That's how I looked at it. If I could find a way using something like PSAW or PSAW itself to know what they need, at least at some level of confidence, then I feel a lot more prepared to deal with them and give them what they need to give me what I need. So I hope this has been helpful for you. I know I have enjoyed it immensely, and I want to give you an opportunity here. If you have any questions that I can answer here in the next 7 minutes or so, I don't want to run over, but I want to give you that chance. Dennis, tell them what they've won, how they do this.
Well, they just type in the dashboard and type in your questions, and I'll paraphrase them or quote you, and we'll get the questions to Geoff, and I'm sure we'll get some very interesting and lucid answers. I do have one that just sort of came in, and Geoff, you were talking a lot about, let's say, our roles as a role and responsibility of being a leader and motivating. Is it possible to use someone from outside to be a coach for my team members?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, I think had I realized what, the whole personality style thing and the impact I was having on people that I didn't even know I was having, I would have realized that I wasn't a very good coach. But that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. I could get consultants involved, internal coaches, maybe have a buddy system. That's done all the time. Maybe a mentor, someone from HR, there's all kinds of ways to go, but I think our first and best option, especially for career growth, is to learn how to coach. And coach, I'll have to learn how to smile more than I do now, and I have to learn how to engage people at a higher level than I do now, one-on-one. But yeah, can you use an outside person? Absolutely.
Okay, great. We have a question from Robert around how does this play into conflict? And I might be paraphrasing this, Robert, so it isn't really your question, but I'm going to say is there's aspects of motivation around conflict, and I guess that's motivating for resolution. Could you talk a little bit about that, Geoff?
Yeah, a piece I'll give you a real good way. Let me see if I can get there real quick. There. Robert, if you look here, I've gone back to, forget which, I don't see the number on it, but it doesn't matter. If you look there, you can see, let's take the direct personality style in the upper left-hand corner. It is diametrically opposed to the considerate style. And if you look at the spirited style in the upper right-hand corner, it is diametrically opposed to the systematic style, which is in the lower left-hand corner. This has built-in conflict to it that we can reduce if we help people understand what their personality does to other personalities. So since I'm systematic, what I really have to remind myself, smile, be prepared for somebody to engage and maybe ask questions that I may not be as comfortable with as I'd like. Questions like, well, what did you do over the weekend? Did you have family over? Well, a systematic, I'm thinking, that's none of your business. But from a spirited standpoint, that's something that they're just trying to engage me with and try to make contact with me. So if I understand that, I can reduce conflict, but I got to know it first. So I hope that answers your question, Robert.
Great, great. And Helen has an interesting question, very short, and I'm just going to add a little piece to it. Is she asked, how do I assist with burnout? And what immediately came to my mind, Geoff, was about that self-actualization you mentioned in the Maslow section. And please, could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, burnout is probably the opposite of self-actualization. I tend to refer to self-actualization in such a way that it seems like I'm talking about nirvana, and I don't mean it that way. Burnout is a slow amount of without trying to be a psychologist, but quite frankly, burnout has to do with depression and people feeling defeated, feeling like they can't make a difference. And what we have is a problem with self-esteem. And the focus in burnout would be to help people succeed at a higher level than they are now. Let me give you an example. I had a salesperson at one time who was burning out, and she was an inside salesperson. So she had all the emotional labor that goes with that. And what I did was I put her on a project. I did parcel out some of her prospects that were coming up, and I had her write something up for me. I gave her a change of pace. It did impact her sales, but only for a short time. It was only for a week or so. And then when I got her back into the sales thing, I gave her responsibility for a certain, what do I want to say, demographic of companies. It was kind of prestigious and challenging, and she and I talked about how do we attack this. So it was a personal approach, but it also provided a lot. I didn't know at the time what to call it, but I provided a lot of emotional nutrition, and that's what we need to help take care of burnout.
Great. Thank you, Geoff. Well, it looks like we're real close to the 1 hour mark, and wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. And Motivating Your Team Members is the name of the webinar. It will be available and posted on our HRDQ-U website, so that you might want to notify your friends how much you enjoyed it and refer them to this particular webinar and our other webinars. And we have regular webinars, and we really appreciate you spreading the word and bringing people into the HRDQ webinar family. And Geoff, any final words you'd like to say before we hit the gavel?
I think one thing I'd say about motivation is if you want more motivation, you're going to have to do something different, and it needs to be consistent. If you do it for a couple weeks and then you kind of give it up, then you probably have done more harm than good. So pick some actions you can take, whether it's writing notes or having 1-minute manager sessions that really are only about 10 or 15 seconds, whatever it is, and make a commitment to do it for some extended period, at least a month, maybe 6 months, something so that it's not a here and gone thing.
Great. Thank you, Geoff. Words of wisdom, and thank you again for everybody attending today's webinar, and we'll see you at the next one. And that concludes our webinar.
Thank you all.